Yeah. So it's all part of the process, which is a useful thing to have. So yeah. So now the other thing, yeah, that's better. I can see everybody now. Okay. So my if everyone is happy about where we about animatics and how to approach them, they're just an addition to your storyboards, really. But they're a way of really telling whether your storyboard works or not when you're doing your thumbnails. I know it just seems like there's a lot more work to do that way, but the difference it makes is quite surprising. Okay, now since we're next Wednesday, you're going to be showing me what you're thinking of doing with your storyboards or your first rough take, just your thumbnail animatics. I'll go on to what I was going to talk to you about next week, which is about color scripts. Okay, here's a book. It's called The Art of Pixar, as every book about Pixar is called. But this is particular one, which is about color scripts. Anybody tell me what a color script is?
Isn't it like kind of a line with all different blocks of color, like each color of the scene, like the main color of the scene or something?
That's correct. Here's one, and it's basically like a storyboard that's been colored in, and so that you can see how the color progresses as the story progresses. Okay, so you can see which scenes are bright, which scenes are dark, um, and the general mood of the piece. So you see, you get some pieces which are bright and sunny, and you get other pieces like here which are very moody and very scary. So it's just, and it's not actually the storyboard that's colored in. This is just drawn sequences. In fact, sometimes these are done before they've done the storyboard. They're just from when they have um, a meeting, because these things are made by a committee. They're not made by one person. They are some of the people sitting in on it are thinking in color rather than thinking of necessarily drawing, because people think in different ways. Some people are not pencil pushers; they are paintbrush pushers. So they would be thinking of the moods of the film, where things are happy, where things are sad. The purpose of color in a film is to tell the audience how they should be feeling about the film. Okay, yeah. So it's any queries about animatics? I'm going to share something now. Actually, I'm not sure I have it open, so I won't do that. If you just bear with me for a second, I'm going to open something and show you a prototype. Okay, so now I'm going to share a screen with you here of a PowerPoint I did for people last year about color scripts. Okay, so can everybody see a purple screen?
Yeah.
Saying scripts, great. Okay, so oop, I don't know why I'm doing that. Okay. Ah, yeah. Okay. Oh, it's messing me about that. Okay. Um, okay. So, don't know why that's toggling like that. Maybe
When
to do
you
this.
click single page, you need to click out of that menu.
Oh yeah, I've got it again now. Okay, so okay. Here's the color script from the Klaus movie from a few years ago. And as you can see here, it's basically they are using storyboard panels, which they've colored, and it's to give the mood of how the story is progressing. So you see some of those are very wintry and grey looking and desaturated in color, and other ones are very warm, where there are interiors and sometimes where there's a sunset. There would be warm light in the sky, and other times very cold, and then sometimes quite yellow, sometimes quite blue, depending on the mood that they want to give for that particular shot or that scene. Okay, here's the color script from Op. As you can see, there's a lot of variation here, and it seems to jump about almost at random. Parts are in black and white, parts are in color. Some of it's highly saturated, some of it's very desaturated. Some of it has a complete cast of color, where things are the screen can be either all blue or all yellow or green. So it's interesting to see why are they choosing what looks like confusion of color. Now, here's The Incredibles color script, and in this one, the secret of reading this color script is about saturation. If you see the beginning, when they're in their peak as superheroes, every shot is really high saturated and high contrast images because they are comic book heroes, and it's trying to get as close as possible to the super saturated world of superheroes. And it makes it feel fun. So whenever so you have to bear in mind that when you're talking about mood, you're talking about the central character, your protagonist. So when you're changing the mood of each shot, you're changing it so the audience get an insight into the inner thoughts and feelings of the central character, the person you want them to identify with. Now, then as the story goes on, there is a political movement grows up against the superheroes, and they get banned. So this now snaps into very much stark colors. It's just red, white, and blue, and black are the colors that they're using, which is very American color scheme. But then at the end of that sequence, it becomes completely desaturated, and the world, after they've been banned, is desaturated and very low contrast. Everything are shades of grey, and even where there are flesh tones, they've been greyed down. And their everyday world is just grey. Um, so it's not, and even when he tries to be a superhero, it doesn't really work. So the colors are still desaturated. They're slightly brighter than they were, but they're not much brighter. Okay, so then he goes back to his job, and even as he starts failing at his job, um, things get grayer and grayer until all the color is gone, and his skin even becomes gray at this point. So he's at his low point, lowest ebb here. And then he gets the call asking him to do a job as a superhero. And he gets picked up and flown off to this island for his mysterious employer to fight the robot. And the first color that comes back in are blue skies, which of course very similar to the grays. They're very muted pale blues, and where his skin tone is, it's still desaturated, but there's slightly more color to his skin. And then he arrives in the island, and the next thing that comes in are greens. And the greens are quite saturated and less grey because he's in the jungle. And then as the battle continues, he lands and he gets hit by an orange sidelight. And then suddenly everything becomes very hot when he's down in amongst the base of the volcano. And we're getting into super saturated reds, but there's still a lot of black in there, just to keep it that way. But when he emerges victorious, he's coming back to being full color again. And then when he returns to his real world, everything is completely less desaturated. In fact, the color intensity is getting better. But you notice that Violet is still desaturated because she's not the one who's had the adventure. It's Bob who's had the adventure. So his life is getting better because he's enjoying himself more. So the color is coming back into his life. Okay, so now it's not only animators who use color scripts. As you can see here, there's some from Star Wars. There are other ones there from live action films. That's one from The Shining, where the art directors are thinking of the color as a way of telling the story of how the emotions are changing depending on the color. Now I'm pretty sure Laura has already done theory of color to you, so there's no point in me getting into that, but this is something to be aware of, is not only does each color have a meaning when you come to make films, but also how much color there is controls how exciting or how worrying or how frightening something is. So those are just something to bear in mind. Now, I know some of you were talking about making films in black and white, which is fine, and that's actually, there's some great films that are made in black and white. But I think you have to actually think of what you lose when you lose color. So it's just something to think about. Now, for a film as short as the things you're making, there's not going to be much of a color script, but by the time you come to do your third year films, the color script will be important. And in fact, even the third years who were doing their towards professional practice earlier this year, some of their projects used color scripts to great effect, where the mood of the film will seem to be one thing and then suddenly switch to another, and the color is the thing that actually triggers the change. And it's a way of communicating to the audience on an almost subconscious level, because they're not necessarily aware of what you're doing in changing the color. Okay, any questions? I see Ron has the hand up. So Ron, do you have a question? Okay, was that just a mistake by hand? Oh, okay. It's just the panels that I have on the screen. There seems to be a raised hand on your panel, but okay. Yeah, somewhere along the bottom line, one of the reactions I think it is that you can put up your hand, or it's somewhere in amongst the tools you can actually do that. Anyway, okay, your hand's now. That's great. So, any questions about color scripts and their uses?
I think it's like a whole angle to the filmmaking I never really considered before. I mean, obviously I know colors can like symbolize certain things, but the way like the whole gradient of the film can change at moments of, it's really cool.
But this is one of the great things about storyboarding. People think storyboarding is like making a comic book. It's actually so much more than that. You're actually messing with people's mind. You're leading people to conclusions in a way that they're not necessarily aware that you do. It's pretty scary in some ways, but it's part of filmmaking, and it's. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. But it is something that we can all do. I mean, certainly when I was a student, I was not great at color, but it's something you can learn to appreciate. And you learn it from looking at how other people do it. It's like going back to the thing that we were talking about with designing characters, and about plagiarism and how it's wrong to take other people's designs and use them. But the one thing you can take, and it's not plagiarism, is other people's process. Because it's how you synthesize things you see. It's how you use all the elements you have, all the ingredients you have to make your film. It's the way you put them together. And certain people have a way of putting things together which you can emulate, you can actually be inspired by, and there's nothing wrong with actually using a process that you can see works for other people. That is not plagiarism, that is just learning from other people's examples. So if you're going to steal from people, don't steal their designs, don't steal their ideas, steal how they make films.
Certainly good advice.
Any queries about that? Yeah, okay, I see. Finn says, a film mind games. Yeah, cool changes throughout the film. Yeah, and that's, some films that I use The Incredibles as an example because those changes are extreme and they're obvious to see. But other films use them as well, but they do them in such a subtle way you're not even aware that they're doing.
I feel like some directors are kind of known for their color palettes as well, kind of like David Fincher and stuff.
Yeah,
muted,
yeah.
Undersaturated stuff.
And of course, the very sort of cult one is oh god, I've forgotten his name now. Texan. Anyway, doesn't matter. The guy who did Fantastic Mr. Fox and Isle of Dogs.
Oh, Wes Anderson. Yeah.
Wes Anderson, that's it. Yeah, I mean he's famous for also the way he composes the shot, where he has symmetry in his shots and very shallow depth of field. Those things are and a lot of that comes from Stanley Kubrick, who had used the same tricks. If you look at the film like Barry Lyndon, I don't know if any of you have seen Barry Lyndon, but if you view it, if you didn't know it was Stanley Kubrick, you might think it was a Wes Anderson film, because it has total symmetry. Every frame of it was composed like a painting, and where you position everything is very considered. And that's something storyboard artists do a lot. So you just think about that. If you remember, a week or two ago, I sent you the storyboard panel um, and the finished frame from the same scene, from the Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse, and you can see that sometimes you can go to great extremes of posing, and then just from the practical point of making the film, the director decides this is if you are a separate person as the storyboard artist to the person who's the director. In your case, you're both storyboard artist and director. But if you're working for another director, you can go to great extremes to compose shots, to make them pleasing, or for a certain psychological reason. And the director or the producer or a combination of both can decide, no, we don't actually want to do that, and they can change. So there's things where, yes, it's brilliant that you can feel you have that amount of control, but at the end of the day, most filmmaking, other than when you're a student, is actually a collaborative process. So you have to allow for other people to disagree. And so that's one of the reasons for doing storyboards and color schemes, color scripts, is that it allows other people to see what you have in your mind and say, actually, that's not what we want to do. Can you think about why someone would, if you've taken a great deal of care about composing shots, why somebody would want to change and not buy into that?
Like, other than visually, or?
It's about storytelling, really. Sometimes, you want your story to follow an arc. You want it to build to a climax and for the ending. So if you have a knock their eyes out scene, which is very near the beginning, it's very hard to follow it. There's a saying in theater and in musical and in music particularly, of certain acts being hard acts to follow. Certainly back in the 1960s, when they first went to America, the Rolling Stones were on a TV program where they were top billing, and they asked for certain acts who they had actually been fans of to be on the bill with them. And Mick Jagger still says the worst mistake he ever made was asking for certain performers to go on before him, because they were hard acts to follow. And so if somebody is really good early on in a performance, you expect each person coming on after to top that, to be better. And if you're actually not as good as the person who was on before you look crap. And the same thing is true of shots in a film. We expect things to get better as they go on. So if you have a really exciting shot at the beginning of the film, you really have to have an even more exciting shot at the end of the film. If you're not going to leave your audience feeling dissatisfied. So it's those things you have to think about as well when you're structuring your storyboard, because you want things to progress towards like the peak when you hit the main part of your film. The climax of the film has to be the most exciting part of the film. Now, or if it's a funny film, that has to be the most hilarious part of the film. So it's just something to bear in mind as well when you're thinking of cool images that you're going to put on your storyboard. Think about where they are in the story.
And the cadence of the whole thing.
Yeah, because films have a shape to them. There's short films are generally, as we've said in the past, a setup and a payoff. So the payoff is usually the point, which is the climax of the film. But if you look at longer forms of storytelling, there's a thing called the 3-act structure. And this is all to do with the rule of 3. I'm sure Steve has talked to you guys about the rule of 3, where, you know, if something's funny once, it's funny 3 times. But it's effectively the same thing as the setup and payoff. The rule of 3 is, well, anybody tell me what the rule of 3 is?
It's like, I don't think I'm going to be able to explain it right, but it's like you kind of repeat the same thing like 3 times over. And even like towards like the end of a film or something, they might come into kind of trouble kind of 3 times before it's like concluded.
Yeah. There's great examples of this even in children's storybooks. There's the Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, and there's the 3 Little Pigs, where you have basically the first time something happens, say like with the 3 pigs, we have the pig builds a house, the wolf comes along, he goes through his routine of I'll huff, I'll puff, I'll blow your house in. He blows the house over and the pig runs away. The second time he comes to the house of sticks, he goes through the same routine, puffs, puffs, blows the house down. And then the third time, so you see the first time is the setup. The second time is reinforcement. So basically we're now leading the audience so that they think they know what's going to happen next. The third time is the payoff, is the twist. Because the third pig has made his house out of bricks. And when the wolf comes to huff and puff, he can't blow the house down. So this is how the rule of 3 works, is that it only works, which is a twist at the end. The 3 Billy Goats Gruff is the same idea. With Goldilocks, you've got 3 threes, because you have 3 bears. So when she comes in and she sits at the table, there's a chair that's too hard, there's a chair that's too soft, and there's a chair that is perfect, but it collapses under it. So you see there's a twist at the end. It's a perfect chair, but it breaks. Then there's the bowls of porridge. One is too hot, one is too salty, and the third one is just right, and she eats it all up, which is not much of a twist. And then she goes to the bed, and one bed is too soft, the other bed is too lumpy, the third bed is just right. She falls asleep and gets caught by the bear. So there's her twist at the end. So this is a structure to the film. There is a build there to the narrative, where, you know, each successive one ups the ante on the last one. So just think about those things. And then the 3-act structure goes back to, actually Shakespeare had a 5-act structure, but the classic is said to be 3 acts. So basically you have your setup, which is your first act, which sets up all the players in the story and what they want, what they need, and what they're striving for. And it sets up the antagonist and how they are going to try and stop the protagonist to get what they want. And the second act is where everything seems to be lost, where the antagonist seems to be winning and the protagonist seems to be losing. And then the third act is where you get your reversal, so that you're with help usually from other people, your protagonist manages to turn the table just when all seems to be lost. Lion King is the perfect example of that, where basically it sets up that he's going to be king of the jungle. The second act, his father gets killed and he gets blamed for it. And then in the third act, with the help of Timon and Pumbaa, he manages to fight back and overthrow his uncle. So there's a basic 3-act structure. And it used to work well on television when television programs were half an hour long. because in America they had 3 advertising breaks. So you could do your first act and break for the ads. You do your second act and break for the ads. And then the weird thing is you have your third act have a break for the ads, and then you go back for the credits, which is weird because nobody ever bothered going back for the credits. So that's just something to bear in mind if you're doing a long form story, which you won't be at the moment, but you may be in the future. Bear in mind that the structure, you can do a lot more with the structure with a long form. And actually, if you notice from the animatic on Consent, you see how leisurely the scenes were at the beginning of that film, how long they were running, because they had 3 minutes to play with, as opposed to the 15 seconds you had. So they had time to actually expand the scene and to have leisurely scenes where nothing very much is happening other than it's setting up with the character as well, and what they find important. What do they want, and what do they desire, and what do they not want in the case of Consent. So those are just things where Consent is a hard one to do in a short form, but it's something which, if you have the time to actually do it, it's something that could be very rewarding. Thanks. No, there's a noise. Okay. Right. Okay, so any queries about that? I'm sorry, someone's just going on the room. Yeah, and now my dog is in the room as well, so we might get some howling. No, she doesn't. She wants to be with me. Okay, so unfortunately, she has a habit of when she's in here and I'm talking, but not to her, she tends to complain. So you might get some whining. It's okay. I'm not kicking her. I'm not hurting her. No, I'm not going to show you the dog. Maybe later. Okay.
Man.
So, sorry, Henry, you were going to say something.
Oh no, that's an accident. Sorry.
Okay. No, it's just what was I talking about? Yeah, structures of stories. So, so much of storyboarding is about structure of storytelling. There's a huge overlap with script writing. I know you've done script writing in the past with Timu, and that's a very useful thing to know about, because if you're going to go to the film board and present to them and try to get them to give you money, or if you're thinking of making a TV program or something and you want to show it to a broadcaster, most of those people want to read a script because they're live action filmmakers basically, and so they're more used to looking at scripts than they are storyboards. And many people in broadcasters are not really any good at reading storyboards, which is another reason for actually giving them an animatic, because they can actually see that and imagine. They don't have to use their imagination to see what they're going to get at the end of the day. Whereas if they have words, they have something that they're used to analyzing. So that's a great thing. But if you go back in time, if you go back to the old days of Looney Tunes, when it was Chuck Jones and Tex Avery and people like that making Bugs Bunny movies, one of the great scriptwriters for those films was a guy called Mike Maltese. Now, Mike Maltese, if you read Chuck 'Em Up, which is Chuck Jones's autobiography, Mike Maltese was actually dyslexic, although there wasn't a word for it at the time. But he basically was not very good at writing. And so, how did he get around that? How did he get to be one of the top scriptwriters for animation? What he did was he drew storyboards. So he used to actually draw thumbnail storyboards and pitch his ideas to the rest using images rather than actually writing dialogue or screen descriptions. Now, if you're pitching to a group of animators, that's the perfect way of pitching your ideas. You don't need a script if you're going to pitch to other animators. It's only if you're pitching to a studio executive that they expect to see a script. So in a lot of ways, there's a big overlap between storyboard and scriptwriting. So it can be used in a very creative way, and especially the old way of doing storyboards, where you had an actual board on the wall that you pasted or pinned up pieces of paper with the drawings of the panels on. It's very creative because people can actually just unpin and move one shot to another place and can quickly draw another one to take its place, and it's very interactive. Digitally now, there's a huge scope for that as well. If you have a digital form, it's very easy for people to actually shuffle around shots and add in shots as well. So everything's gone full circle in a lot of ways. When we used to draw on storyboard sheets, on things like this, you had to actually physically cut out and paste it somewhere else. But now it's much easier because digitally you can do it. It's easy. Any questions about that? No. Okay. So what I was going to say now is maybe you want to go away and do some storyboards, and if you have time, try an animatic. And if you're thinking color, try slapping down a few colors to see how they affect the mood. But if you're going to do the colors and you're going to do it physically on a piece of paper rather than actually digitally, but if you're doing it digitally, make sure the color is on a separate level from your line work, so you don't end up not being able to change it without destroying the line. And if you're going to do it on a piece of paper, I would suggest you do as with the color scripts. Don't do your storyboard colored in. Just do images that are similar to the images that you have in your storyboard on your piece of paper. Any questions about that?
So for next week, do we just need like a rough storyboard to show you?
Rough storyboard is perfect. If you have time, make an animatic. If you don't have time, don't make an animatic. But think about timings roughly in your head as you're going. I mean, that's generally what storyboard artists do anyway. They know that, this shot is just an anticipation to another shot, so that's not going to be on for very long. Another scenes you want are really crucial and you want the audience to be able to see. So, that's the ones that you hold longer. And just think roughly about timing. Also think about a lot of people will put in shots where people are walking because you've done a lot of exercises of walk cycles and things, so it seems to be something that is easy to do. But bear in mind, a walk cycle, if you've got a character taking say 4 steps, you've used up 2 seconds of your 10 seconds just in having someone take 4 steps. So you only use that when it's actually going to have a good result, when it's going to actually do some good in telling your story. Okay, so anyone got a problem with showing me something next Wednesday? Are there any conflicts to any other people's deadlines or projects?
No, I don't think so.
Great
Yeah, I
stuff.
think we're good.
Okay, that's all good for me too then. So next Wednesday morning we'll set aside the morning and you can each show me your storyboard, if that's okay. Yeah? Okay, well, I'll leave you spend the rest of this class doing that. I know you have a class this afternoon, so you'll have another hour and a half or so to be working on the storyboards and your ideas. Okay, you may find that as you're storyboarding, your character designs change. This happens all the time. Oh yeah, there's one other thing. If you're going to do several characters walking, you see these characters here. Okay, this is from Punky, which was by Geronimo. Okay, so if you see Punky, who's the little girl here, she has very short legs. The mother has really long legs. Now, the mother, for each step she takes 12 frames. So Punky, to cover the same amount of distance, has to take 3 steps for every one of her moms. And the brother has to take 2 steps for every one of the moms. So you have to allow for the fact that, okay, if it takes 12 frames for that, her steps, she's running to keep up with the mother. Okay, so those are just things that you have to bear in mind when you're structuring your characters. Sometimes you'll find that it's actually impossible for your characters to actually walk side by side. So those are things that then you have to actually start adapting your designs to meet the needs of what you're going to need them to do to tell the story. Okay? Any queries about that?
That makes sense.
Okay, good stuff. So those are just little things to bear in mind when you're actually doing your storyboard. Okay, well, good luck everyone. I'll see you next week.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Gary.
Thanks,
Thank
Gary.
you.
Gina.
Good.
Thank you.
Bye.